I'm going to keep it 100 to y'all. I don't actually care how faithful the Marvel Cinematic Universe adapts Ms. Marvel. Not that I don't take interest in the process or the changes, but I chose that name and thumbnail more so to create a reason as to why would someone watch me talk about Ms. Marvel, because I want to talk about my favorite superhero. Iron Man, don't care. Flash, never ever saw him. Spider-Man 2, boring. The Dark Knight, overrated. No Normal though. No Normal is sick. I've been watching cartoons, movies, and playing superhero media ever since I first remembered. But if you ask, even to my younger self, I never could truly connect with a superhero before. However, ever since I've randomly first read the debut comics of Kamala Khan on the internet, simply because I thought her design was cute, I ended up with a superhero story that actually resonated with me from tooth to nail, capturing that old appeal and optimism of superheroes and applying it with modern sensibilities and discussions. Talking with accuracy and care from boy problems to religion, abusive access to right-wing rabbit holes, from superheroing to maintaining a healthy relationship to the people around you. This character strongly resonated with people, and it's not hard to see why they weren't super excited about MCU's take on the character. Hot take? The MCU is good? I know about how they are ruining cinema and propelling military propaganda and are defenders of the capitalistic status quo, but honestly, I've been following these guys for most of my life now. I feel like the studio generally put out some not only good, but great movies from time to time, with people that pretty clearly cares about what they are doing. You are welcome to feel any sort of way towards the company, but personally, it's going to take a lot of bad movies for me to completely give up on them. I do sympathize though, especially towards the Ms. Marvel fandom, as the lead up to the show was very awkward. A lot of things leaking, little being said, and eventually the confirmation that Kamala's shape-shifting and morphing powers were being completely changed created a still going discussion and dissatisfaction. Especially when Sana Amanat, one of the original creators of the character and a producer in both the comics and the show, let out a statement implying that the change was made to better fit Kamala in the MCU and not to serve her own story, losing not only something important to the image, but also the messages of the character. The show came out to mild reception. Most people agreed that the first 2 episodes are really good, but the rest pretty weak. Comic fans still feeling unsatisfied due to the changes made, and with some Muslim people feeling like some decisions in the story weren't particularly respectful towards their history. I will talk about all of those in this video, but in my opinion, this show is pretty good. Easily my favorite MCU project for a good while. I think the show is overall well made, with a clear passion from the people behind the screen, and most importantly for this video, a different but interesting take on Kamala Khan, her friends, and the impact of Ms. Marvel. So I will review the show. And a last disclaimer here is that obviously there are parts of Ms. Marvel which were made by and to Muslim people. It talks about their culture, their history, and as I mentioned, not everybody seemed to fully embrace it. I will talk about it because talking about Ms. Marvel and not touching her culture seems to be pointless, but I'll make sure to distance myself and share perspectives that actually come from Muslim people in this video, okay? So let's review Ms. Marvel. The comic book first. Kamala Khan is a nerdy Muslim Pakistani teenager from New Jersey who loves superheroes. And at the moment where you first begin to expectate her journey, she is on those teenager years where everything she wants is to be included. She wants to be seen as a cool person and be at the side of the cool kids, resulting in one day where she sneaks away from home and goes into a party from the cool kids just to be extremely uncomfortable and listen to microaggressions towards her. Running away from the party, a magical alien mist infests the city. Inhaling that mist, Kamala starts being affected by it, gets knocked out, wake up with a vision of her favorite superheroes lecturing her in Urdu language and proverbs, breaks a cocoon, and turns into a white woman. This is how Kamala got her shape-shifting powers. Not only can she bend and extend her body in many ways, she also can totally change how she looks and sounds. And that feels awful. Her body and mind are at a trillion miles per hour, running completely different directions. She has the powerful, commonly attractive superhero body that she always looked up to, and she cannot feel anything but confusion and dysphoria. However, it is in these chaotic moments that we see Kamala being her genuine true self. Once she sees Zoe, one of the popular girls who rejected our protagonist earlier, helplessly falling down to the river. And Kamala saves her, her body completely going AWOL, but she saved her. From that moment forward, Kamala quickly understands that she has a gift that can be used to save people. But more importantly, it is with these newfound responsibilities that Kamala starts to understand the worries of her family, the mindset of her friends, the highs and lows that comes with being a superhero, and it is through all of those experiences that form who Kamala Khan really is. Needless to say, I love these books. The accessible but still profound story that G. Willow Wilson wrote alongside the colorful but still realistic art of Vader and Alphona resulted in some of the best superhero stories I've ever experienced. Kamala Khan is a nerdy Muslim Pakistani teenager from New Jersey who loves superheroes, and at the moment we start watching her journey, we see she's a bit out of place. Or at the very least, I do feel more of an outsider to her family, friends, and faith here than I do in the comics. Similarly, being in the final years of her high school, she is confronted with the fact that she has to start preparing for her future. Essentially, she has to understand herself too, but doesn't feel ready. The two main differences of that arc in the show are that, first, this is kind of imposed to her. Kamala is at a very comfortable status quo that she is very afraid to change, placing our protagonist more as a reluctant hero. And second, so much of that journey of self-discovery is specifically focused in her relationship with her family, even more so to her mother. Kamala, both in the comics and in the show, has a bit of a troublesome relationship with them. Not that they are toxic or abusive, actually Miss Marvel's benevolence and empathy comes from them, but more so that they are distant from each other, and that communication is not very present. While in the comics that's an overall background of Miss Marvel as a character, the show heavily focuses on it and uses as the main narrative crux of the story. Yes, it's a Disney media from 2022 about generational trauma. And the tool that forced Kamala to confront her past and future is a family heirloom given by her grandmother, which, when our protagonist wears it, gives not only the powers hidden within her, that being of creating anything with a cosmic matter, but also visions of the past. This change is extremely divisive and for good reason. I mean, it actually goes against what Willow Wilson said about not giving Miss Marvel flashy powers, but you can see how a specific group of people would be dissatisfied with the overall body dysphoria element of the story being lost, when that was an instrumental part of what made people resonate with her. Even so, I would like to pay respect for this change because I do feel like it was a very thoughtful decision that just hasn't achieved its true potential. It was a way to satiate the human machine known as Feige, but also serve the story. We removed the elastic powers, which would be a pain in to design in CGI, gave her new powers that differentiate her from another popular character, and also we gave the tool that gave those powers not only a story but also a symbolic importance. One of the main plot points of the show is that Kamala constantly gets visions of the traumatic event of the partition, the very moment that Pakistani as a country was born. I'm still shocked they did this, but I also understand why in the point of view of the creators. I mean, you're working with a company that is synonymous with pop culture in cinema's most profitable franchise about a Muslim Pakistani character. So the writers used this opportunity to not only represent, but also teach. As I mentioned previously, it does not mean that everyone was particularly satisfied with this representation. One take that caught my attention is how people felt like the show heavily simplifies and unpoliticizes the events of the partition. It's such a serious debating fact that I'm not going to even try to summarize, as I am afraid of simplifying it myself. So just note that the show just argues that it was all the British fault and the Pakistanis and Indians were all well and good when they really weren't. Most of what I said just now, it's still just plot points and themes. How does the show convey these ideas in the narrative and presentation itself? So, let's get out of the way already. Iman Vellani is a goddamn star. The sheer cuteness and charisma of her performance has already been talked about it a bunch, but I do think she manages to convey well the many facets of Kamala. The optimism, the uncertainty, even some traces of her ability to lead and inspire people are shown in its early form here. Something I would like to point out too is the fact that Kamala in the MCU currently strikes me as a little different than in the comics. I feel like in the books, Ms. Marvel has a pretty bold personality. She wishes to be popular, but she certainly isn't shy nor introverted. She quickly assumes the position of a superhero figure in New Jersey and fights pretty physically to protect it while screaming on the enemy's face. While in the show, she is much lower key. Introverted, she flees much more from combat than embrace it, even having some neurodivergent aspects to her. Those things can easily change or evolve, I imagine, but I find these little differences to still mark Iman's Kamala with her own identity. There aren't many actors here that jumps at me in any way. Most of them are doing their job competently, most of them looking like they are having fun at least. I guess the one who got the short end of the stick is Rish Shah as Kanan. My man was just not selling well, specifically when it mattered the most. And in the opposite direction, Zenobia Shroff as Kamala's mother is like the actual highlight though. She was taking this way more seriously than everybody else and delivered the interesting nuance to a character that clearly don't have her things together as much as she looked like it, and makes the emotional moments of the story really hit. And finally, another interesting actress here is one that is important less for the acting sadly and more so for the casting itself, being Yasmin Fletcher as Nakia, Kamala's best friend. The biggest difference here is that Yasmin is brown, having a white parent, compared to the full-fledged Turkish descent she is in the comics. This is part of the changes that sadden some, as Nakia is a popular character in the books. She is a representation of what a lot of people in the West believe Muslim people to be, with her more rigorous and loyal following of the Islamic religion and its teachings, but she subverts expectations because she's actually a very progressive and well-meaning person, showing that Islam does not simply hold women back but can empower them. I don't really like Nakia. She's the closest the comics gets to a Mary Jane, in the way that Nakia matters less as a person herself and more so of how she's connected to others, a symbolism of the well-being of others, if you will. And the thing is, I think this change actually improved the character. She's giving a little bit more dimensions, more facets. And the fact that she is brown in the middle of these two different cultures results in one of the most interesting dialogues in the story, about trying to feel included, not being able to, and eventually trying to be the difference she was looking for, which is a microcosmos of Miss Marvel as a story pretty much. If it was intentional from the start, or Disney was just lazy to hire an English-speaking Turkish young actress, I'm not sure, but this particular decision in Nakia pointed to something I feel the writers were consciously trying to do in the show. Here, Nakia is much more girl bossy. Her own slogan is changes her, changes you, changes her you, to make her feel more stylish, more in control of herself, and more importantly, more likable. A lot of differences in the show were made to make these characters more likable. Kamala is more introverted, Bruno is even nicer and cuter, Kamala's family is way quirkier, Zoe is much more naive than she is ignorant, Karam is less evil, etc. etc. I believe there was a real attempt to make them all be likable and relatable because, let's be real, when the poster came out and most immediately talked about terrorism or pornography, we know that there is a high mountain to climb here, especially in a community populated by so many conservative scums. To me, a lot of changes were made to feel like there wasn't a process in liking or understanding them. Everything feels so much nicer, funnier here than it does in the colorful, but still sort of realistic worlds that her books depict. We can't rely on star power like in Moon Knight or on a legacy character like She-Hulk. We have to start from scratch with an unpopular character to mainstream media with an extremely stigmatized culture. They wanted to make an impact, and fast. That's why there are a lot of references and hooks that connects Ms. Marvel to other potential movies in the franchise. We have to quote-unquote justify its existence because we are riding against a current. And even then, the show is currently the least watched of all Marvel Disney Plus series by a considerable margin. Which, once again, is a pity because I like this show. I would say that almost all of its episodes are well directed and made. Obviously, the first two are the highlights of the show, with the use of animations and cartoons creatively placed in different parts of the scenario, the quick cuts and camera play that are pretty inspired by directors like Edgar Wright. I also like the consistency of the overall colors, especially the contrast of neon red and blue. It adds to the euphoria and surreality of this moment in our protagonist's life. And even in some of the later episodes, there are still some shots and moments that I found to be pretty entertaining. The writing is compelling, even with unbalanced pacing and limitations that they had. I still found their approach to most aspects of the story to be competent and smart. Laura Carpman absolutely kills in the soundtrack of the show, seamlessly transition from common epic strings to hip-hop and electronic music, all of those accompanied by South Asian instruments and compositions, creating one of my favorite scores in the entire franchise. It's one of the most character-driven and focused stories that the MCU has put out recently, one that dedicates much more time to human relationship and growth than the more actiony and roller coaster aspects of the franchise, creating something personal, nostalgic, and topical. But I still find it hard to say it's great. Mostly because of the human machine we call Feige. For most movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, my most present criticism was the lack of directorial and personal control on those films. There was definitely a skinning process present. And Kevin Feige, the main man that leads the franchise, proclaimed that they would give more control to these creative minds in Phase 4, and I believe him. It does feel like the most, if not creative, at the very least the quirkiest the MCU has ever been, with different projects that do give different enough vibes from each other. But to focus on the enough, it's definitely not as free or as open compared to other studios, which is still not saying a lot. However, I feel like the problem nowadays is time restraint. Stage 4 of the MCU is the longest one yet, with like 15 different projects in the time span of 2 years, with a lot of the 3D artists being the same, by the way. Phase 4 feels like the most ambitious this franchise has been, but fell short not because of creative restraint, but simply because they did not have time to fully live up to their potential. This has domino affected almost all of these stories, Miss Marvel included. There are a lot of scenes that feel awkward, look ugly, or story moments that feel like a middle draft, one that was expected to be refined later, or maybe being in a movie, but never did. One particular scene that bothered me was one from episode 4, where Kamala is talking to her grandmother looking at the city of Karachi. It's such a strong moment in the story, although problematic because of the unpoliticizing the partition stuff, and the whole episode is all about connecting with the roots of her culture. But in the scene, the city is CGI. It looks noticeably off-putting, distracting, and removing a lot of the weight of the scene, making this iconic city not that different from other multiverses and alien worlds of the series. Almost the same applies to the flashback in episode 5, one that is so bland and direct to the point that feels more like filling a checklist than a part of the narrative. A lot of the story relies on our connection to Kamala's family, to her friend group, to the mosque, to New Jersey itself, but a third of the show is occupied by her travel to Karachi, taking out of the picture so many characters of the narrative. I don't even think it is as bad as people make it out to be, but it felt intrusive. I can even tell where they were coming from with this decision. We have here the first South Asian hero of the MCU, and we have this massive Disney budget where we could do what we want, so obviously we should go and record scenes in Pakistan. But it just felt like it didn't really match with any other piece of the puzzle. I have absolutely nothing to say about the Red Daggers. Sorry, Cunning fans, I love him too. These are the reasons why I still have trouble in saying that this is a great or ideal adaptation of Miss Marvel. But it is one that is faithful, and to understand the faith that leads Kamala Khan, we have to look at the villains. Miss Marvel's first villain, the Inventor, is immediately not supposed to be taken seriously. He's a smart but pathetic bird-like clone of Thomas Edison. However, the role he played in the story was still very impactful. Basically, in the comics, he invents a lot of powerful tools and machines, but they are powered through human life. So he goes around and doesn't kidnap random civilians, rather, he gaslights teenagers. He proposes the idea towards kids that feels ostracized in their lives to sacrifice their free will to be a part of his machines. Clearly, all of them are in the same headspace that Miss Marvel was at the beginning of the story. And I mean, if you're lost in life, feel like you don't have a strong connection to your family and friends, and it is almost at an age where you have to fight and justify your existence through work, in a words that people don't like or respect you because of the way we were born into a world, it's pretty easy to see why they have chosen to sacrifice themselves for the Inventor, because they don't see a future for themselves. When Miss Marvel frees them, they are reluctant, frustrated even. And then she saves them. Not by just beating the bad guy and fleeing away, but actually talks and empathizes with them. Seeing this small, immature, brown South Asian girl bleed in the fight to get them out of there, that do not see them as adolescents in an edgy phase, but as the conflicted human being that they are, clearly resonated with these children because of who she really is. A brown superhero girl. If Spider-Man proposes the idea that everyone can wear the mask, Miss Marvel argues that a mask doesn't even need to exist. When you look at Miss Marvel, she reminds you that there is a human in there, and that's what makes her special. That's what makes you special. To me, Miss Marvel's true supervillain is loneliness. Trying to maintain relationship has always been Kamala's biggest challenge, and the villains she faces were taking advantage in their loneliest times, or prosper in that loneliness. But Miss Marvel argues that choosing empathy, that choosing to befriend, as hard, as scary, as much pain that it can give to you, it's still worth doing it. And it can be through those relationships that we start to understand who we are, and consequently being able to love ourselves. And when Kamala Khan loves herself, she becomes Miss Marvel. The clandestines are for better and mostly for worse, the driving force of the show, the characters that force Kamala to face herself and her family. And conceptually, I really like what they portray. The Jinn were banished from the realm and they desperately want a way back home. The key being the bangle, but also at the cost of the life of the one wearing it. Although they seemingly are a family or got really close after so many years of proximity, they, especially Najma, heavily associates their connection, their family, with their actual physical home. She is desperate to go back to that status quo, abandoning the few new connections she had in her new life in pursuit of the old one, while her sister Aisha, Kamala's grandmother, did exactly the opposite. She found a new home, a new family, a new community that loved her, and she loved back. They are a not so subtle mirror to Kamala, but also a representation of the trauma of the partition, a character motive that reflects the many people who were stripped out of their land and had an extremely hard time adapting to their new lives on their new country. And in the process of learning herself and her history, we finally understand that the message of the Miss Marvel show is about having a trustful community that empowers you. Be it with your friends at school, with the people at the mosque, and with family members. Maintaining a strong and truthful connection to the people around you give you strength, and they can inspire you in the same way you can inspire them. That is shown quite literally in Kamala's costume. The mask made by her best friend, the robes coming from her heritage, the scarf coming from a loved one, the thunder being the first letter of her name in Arabic, and all of those tied together in a package by her mother. I think this is a powerful and well constructed statement within the show that uses the language of TV show and cinema to convey the journey and cycle that Kamala Khan faced. In showing empathy and protecting the people that she loves, she learned who she really is and how to love herself. And when Kamala Khan loves herself, she becomes Miss Marvel. Pretty faithful if you ask me. Post-credit scene. The mutants doesn't matter. Die.